My name's Anastasia. I am currently a project coordinator at Nikki Inc. Public Relations. I'm also a student as well. So I guess I have that kind of lens when it comes to still being in school while also being in the industry. So at Nikki Inc., I basically do a little bit of everything, whether it's pitching or writing, press releases, blogs, website design, all that fun stuff. It's kind of just like doing a little bit of everything so I can, just be jack of all trades, as they say. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
My name is Natasha and I work at Leaders PR. So we do mainly music PR, generally under the rock genre. So anything metal, anything punk, pop punk, a little bit of EBM, a little bit of synthwave, dark wave, all that fun stuff. We also do a bit of some other stuff, which is like TikTok marketing, social media campaigns, basically anything, we do it. So that's a lot of fun because I get my hands in a bunch of different areas. So nice to meet you guys, and I'm very excited for the panel.
Hey, Myke Atkinson. I started in community radio on my first day of classes at the university, and then went through school, ended up coming back. Well, I kept my show once I graduated, and then came back and worked as the music director for a couple of years, left and had my first kid, and came back and became the station manager for a while. And these days I'm not at the radio station anymore. I work at the Calgary Library, but I have did shows on radio for like 20 years, and from everything from 2 to 6 in the morning. The last show I did was Friday mornings from 7 to 10 in the morning, called Big Friday.
And worth mentioning too that you got a community radio legend status awarded to you, which is big community radio. So congrats on that.
Sweet.
Well, and you've all actually done a bunch of really cool things. So why don't you share a little bit? What are some of the most successful campaigns that you've worked on so far in your field? Anastasia, again, starting with you.
Yeah, I guess that's it's a pretty interesting question. And I think because there's so many different things, I guess something that always feels rewarding is when you have a pitch that your client is really passionate about, and you keep working at it, you keep trying to find contacts, all that good stuff, and then it actually goes through. So the one that was really exciting for us, I guess, was we have a client. Her name is Josie Ho. She's a actress. I guess a movie that I think everyone knows, Contagion. She was in that. And she also had a couple other projects this past year that she's been working on, such as Habit. It's a movie that came out, as well as Edge of the World. So she's been doing great. And she actually just had a spread in Fashion Magazine, which was super exciting. It was nice to, do all the stuff in the background, such as sending in the photos, trying to figure out all the interview stuff and all that good stuff. It was just one of those things that it was just rewarding to be able to see that all go through and pan out, and see at the end, you get the magazine, and then you're like, oh my gosh, look at all the stuff that we put together, whether it was that photo that you sent in, or even little things like sending in who took the photo, all that good stuff. I think that's something that always sticks out for me.
Cool. That must have been really rewarding to see all your work visually laid out like that. And Natasha, anything you want to share about a successful campaign you've worked on?
Yeah. So actually, a few months ago, would have been in June, we had a metal band called Atreyu. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the band. They're basically sort of a medium to large size metal band from the US. And some of the newer stuff we've been doing is lifestyle marketing. So basically kind of getting artists involved on a lifestyle level, which could be with a collaboration on Instagram with somebody in a field that they really like, It could be YouTube, it could be a guest blog, it could be anything. So we actually had Porter McKnight from the band do a Instagram collab with Lauren Toyota of Hot for Food. She actually used to be a Much Music VJ as well. So she's a vegan chef who has a pretty cool YouTube channel. So we actually had them do a live where he made some vegan food and she kind of interviewed him about their new album and, all that kind of stuff. That was a huge win for me personally because I used to run home and watch Much Music every single night after school back in the day when Much on Demand was still a thing. So that was huge because, it's really like, wow, I'm really doing this. And it was kind of a cool moment for me.
Yeah, and it also goes to something we'll talk about later, which is collaborations and the art of arranging those. So excited to hopefully hear more about how you made that work later on. Myke, what about you? Any campaigns or promotions that have really stuck out?
Funding drive was a really big thing for our station. So CJSW usually traditionally has raised around $200,000 over our week. It's a pretty big and important part of the way that the station sort of operates and fundraises. So I was able to work on 4 campaigns while I was station manager. And I guess, those campaigns taught me a lot about this sort of world in terms of getting your message out, having a consistent message across multiple shows and making sure that you're able to sort of tailor that message depending on who's presenting it, how to sort of customize it to the needs of the audience and the needs of the person who's putting that out there. Probably the funding drives would be my biggest way in.
Just so folks who are kind of new to radio know, especially with community radio, a fund drive is basically a week or two where a station does a campaign to raise funds, raise money to help support the station and its different projects. Let's talk about some of the things that made those campaigns work. What are some important things to keep in mind when you are doing promotions?
The number one thing is just organization. And I know it's one of those things that, you hear everywhere, but when you're working with a team and you're trying to, just coordinate whether it's the timing of everything going up, what everything looks like everything always comes down to organization. So even things like using the right fonts or making sure you have the right colors, is it orange, but what kind of orange, which specific orange, all those little things can really make or break the situation. And I think with organization, it just makes the whole situation smoother, especially if you're working with a group of people. We use, all the things that I'm sure everyone else uses, whether it's Google or Dropbox or anything like that, just somewhere that you can go and know that the folders are all together in the right places, and then everyone knows where to access what, because maybe someone is one day they can't come in for work. So, but this deadline has to be met. So where can we go to find all the content that you need? So I think organization is just always a staple to have when it comes to successful campaigns.
Definitely. Natasha, do you have anything that you would want to share as the most important to keep in mind?
Sure. So for me, I think it's really important to remember that it's okay to think of the box. That, if you've got an idea, even if it seems like something that might be a little crazy or a little weird or a little out there, or there's someone you really, really want to work with, I think it's important to keep in mind that, there might be a good shot. I mean, the chance of, the important thing is to reach out and, to try to make those connections with those people, because you never know what can come down the line. Even if it's a no right now, you could have something in a few months where it's yeah, absolutely. So it just depends. It's just, going for it and trying different things.
Awesome. Thank you. Definitely useful in radio to think outside the box. Myke, anything specific that you wanted to share?
Whenever I did talks about funding drives or radio things in the past, the one message I always say to programmers is focus on your program. You can't sell people on a bad program. So, and that's doesn't matter if you're just like trying to get them to listen or trying to get them to donate or whatever the thing is. Like, you've really got to focus in on what it is you're doing in terms of the program, how you're presenting yourself, why the listener would come to you in the first place. And I think that really that goes into the second piece that I'd say, which is it's all about thinking about who's on the other side, who it is that you're trying to reach, and then how you can go about reaching them. Is it through relationships? Is it through developing something that they need, or maybe they know they need it, maybe they don't know they need it, but like, I think the more that you can put yourself into the user on the other side's shoes and sort of like what their needs are, their expectations are, you'll get a lot more out of that. So if you're pitching to a newspaper, understanding like what the needs of a newspaper are, filling a certain number of column inches every day, having engaging content, having a story that like sells newspapers. That's ultimately what they're trying to do. If you put yourself into their shoes, it becomes a lot easier to suddenly be like, oh, this is the pitch that I need to make because it aligns with their expectations, and it does a lot of the selling work for you.
100%. And that actually leads into our next question, which is going to ask you to maybe share some things, a bit more fun stories, I guess. What are some of the most creative promotional ideas that you've ever encountered? Or can you tell us of any that were really bad, learning from other people's mistakes here?
I think that when it comes to, like team meetings and all that stuff and brainstorming and everything, especially when there's something new, like with TikTok, for example, it's just like one of those things where you're trying to balance like what's still trendy, what's like in, what's not in anymore, what are the sounds that everyone's using and all that stuff. So I think that I can't really think of things that were like necessarily like a completely bad idea. I think it's more just like timing and because what Natasha was saying too, like to think outside of the box is super important. And I think that if you're hesitant to try an idea out, if you can try it and just see if it works or not, like might as well, and then see what happens. You don't really know, especially with social media, I guess you don't really know until like you try it out. Sometimes like the things that go viral are the things that you weren't expecting to go viral. But I think when it comes to like successes, it's just a matter of, I don't know, just like right place, right time, especially with things that we post on, again, social media. And something that's also fun to do are like contests that you can get fans involved and all that stuff. So I think it's just like all those things that are like a feel good moments and just things that bring the community together, and which in turns causes like for more people to know about our clients and what they have to offer.
All right, cool. Thanks. Natasha, what about you?
I think sometimes going back to TikTok, because I think that's a great example. When we had first started working with TikTok, it was a pretty new platform. And I don't know if anybody on the panel has worked with TikTok, but it's sort of like the Wild West in the sense that, you get these influencers who, some of them are 16 and work on their own. Some of them are, 25 and have a manager. Some of them might have 500 followers and charge, $3,000 for a campaign. And then someone might have 1 million who will say, hey, yeah, I'll do it for 200. But I think the biggest mistake is going to an influencer and saying, hey, I want you to do this, 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 and this in terms of collabs. Because when you're talking to people who are creative, you have to remember that they're creative for a reason, and that's why you're going to them. So I think the biggest mistake or biggest bad idea is going to somebody like a creator and saying, I want you to do exactly like this, like I'm asking, because it doesn't work that way, because that kind of hinders their creativity and it kind of ruins the project a little bit. And I think that that's something to keep in mind when you're going and pitching, influencers or creators or people you want to collab with, because you're asking to collab for a reason because they know, what they're doing. So I think that's really important.
True. And it also speaks to trusting the people that you're putting the hands of your campaign in as well, which is very important. Thank you for that one too. Both of you really good ways to look at what's like a bad idea. Myke, anything for you that was either really exciting or something that just fell kind of flat?
The things that come to mind for me are events, because it's such a immediate read the room, and you've either got a full house or you've got 5 people there, and it's pretty easy to tell if you succeeded or not. In terms of sort of the success or fail, I think what Anastasia was saying there about community though, and that like trying to understand like the needs of the community, where you fit in the community, the value that you're bringing to the community, that piece really, I think, stands out. And don't discount fun. People want to have fun, right? Like back in the day, we did the first funding drive Halloween party that we started doing was we did a cover of the album, the compilation Big Shiny Tunes number 2. Don't go to number 1. It's not as good as number 2. And that was probably like right time, right place. The audience of listeners of the station, their age demographic and whatever, it was sold out. I think we sold like 900 tickets in 4 minutes or something like that, just because it was the idea of the fun. The partnerships are always a big thing, right? Tapping into other audiences. So we partnered with a local festival called Sled Island, which are a big sort of like, they put on really great shows in Calgary. So there's you're borrowing a little bit from the expertise, like Natasha was saying, like lean on the people that know what they're doing in these areas. But the other side of it is they have a network. They have an audience that there might be quite a bit of overlap. Maybe the Venn diagrams are extreme, there's a lot of overlap, but there's always someone that they're tapped into that you're not, and vice versa. And so what can you be bringing to the table? And all those things I think really play into whether people get behind it. And people, I think the other thing is thinking about the audience and the ways that they can go from just being a passive participant and actually what are the stages of engagement, right? And that can be on anything. That can be from someone seeing your tweet and reading it. Great. That's one thing. Did they like it? That's another form of engagement. Did they retweet it? Did they quote tweet it? Did they, right? Like how, but giving people ways that they can actually become active participants in something builds community rather than just like becoming part of like the promotional machine. And when people feel like they're actually a part of that, the network effects of those kinds of things can be massive, right? When they actually feel like they're invested and they have something to contribute and they want to contribute because they feel like what you're bringing to the table is valuable for them.
Well, I am ditching my list of questions because of the answers that we've been getting. I think it's important to touch on this next. So you've all sort of mentioned thinking outside the box, creative thinking. So I'm wondering if you have any tips or suggestions about how to think of things that are not already being done, come up with fresh ideas and gain inspiration.
The number one thing for me was like kind of just trying to get over the whole like, oh, is this cringy though? Because I think at the end of the day, like if it is, then it's like, okay, we tried, versus like what could have been. And I think that just being also another thing is just with with your team, just having a space where you can just share ideas, like popcorn them out, no matter how, weird or out of the blue they might be. Once you hear someone else's idea, they might come together, and then there you go. You got like an awesome idea or pitch or campaign or something. And I think that it's important to also tap into your talents that maybe you don't think would be helpful in your job, because all of a sudden, like, a talent that you just do for fun on the side ends up being like the number one reason why the specific idea is going to go through. Whether it's like, I don't know, like you're into a specific type of music, or you know about all these trends on TikTok that you were watching right before going to bed. Like, all these little things that you see in your day to day end up playing into this kind of work, because that's what we're catering to. We're trying to get people's eyes and get their attention. So focus on what is getting your attention in your day to day, and then kind of apply that into the work that you're doing. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, it takes a certain bit of getting over yourself to really put yourself out there, I guess.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you for that one. And Natasha, what about for you? Anything that really helps you out?
Yeah, actually, Anastasia got it right on the head. It's like kind of a mix of what she said was pulling from everything you're seeing on a day to day, like whether you're, looking at, say, you're looking at artists' Instagram pages and you see all these things that they're doing. Then you're looking at this artist, this artist, this artist. Or in this case, if you're looking at, what's this radio host doing? This is my favorite radio host. Like, I'm following them on Instagram. I see what they post. I see what kind of stuff they do on air, and kind of tapping into your past experience, whatever that might be. Like, you could be a tattoo artist and you're like, oh, this could be related to something that this radio host is doing, and maybe I can put that together. And it's the same thing Anastasia said, is like pulling from both things, what you're seeing and what you have in your background. And I think that's kind of how ideas just spark. I know I get a lot of ideas in, like, when I'm almost asleep, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that would work perfect. And like, it's just a lot of, kind of unloading everything you've learned during the day. And yeah, I think that's really kind of what helps be creative.
Cool. I like that about like giving both a bit of a balance, you might call it. Perfect. Myke, what about from your experience?
I love that idea of that Natasha just said, of like, follow the tattoo artist. I'm just going to build on that for a second. So like, you're tapped into the world that you're tapped into, right? And we follow the people that we want to follow, and the people that are like interested in similar things. But I think if there are people that are outside your world a little bit, but are excellent at doing what they do in that space, I find I draw a lot of inspiration from those kinds of connections. So seeing just someone who's, does their A game, but it's in an entirely different space than mine, that's where I can bring some of those ideas, or it spurs creativity in terms of, just fresh ideas, fresh perspectives. Because I think sometimes too, when you're in a community, or there's like language norms and there's cultural norms or whatever within certain communities, and those are super important, but sometimes we can sometimes be a little bit too much with the river. And so if you really want to stand out amongst that, sometimes you need to bring in or have that sort of like idea that does stick out, and you're no longer going with the flow. And I find that can often get sparked from elsewhere. In my day job, I do this thing, it's called design thinking. I'm service designer at the library. And so part of it is designing new services or creative ideas for users. And so the big thing there is starting with who the user is, identifying needs that they have, or like thinking through. So a lot of it is building up like a user story of who's on the other side, what's the gap that they're sort of missing on. And when it comes to actual formal ideation, we call it, it's really important to get into like a flow state. So Natasha touched on it. Sometimes there's certain times in the day that we get into flow states, right before bed, you're in the shower. I definitely have my waterproof notebook in the shower for those, those little ideas that come to you. Always carry a notebook wherever you go. Jot those things down. The other thing is bad ideas are really important. Whenever I'm doing like a facilitated ideation session, I always tell people you have to write down. So we give people a pack of sticky notes and a Sharpie, and it's basically these rapid sessions of 3 to 5 minutes, guided sort of ideation where you have to start with a question like, how might we blank, right? And then you're sort of building upon it, and there's prompts and whatever. But the big thing is to get the bad ideas off your brain so that you can get to the good ideas that are sitting behind it. And so often you'll see or read a bad idea, and from that bad idea, it's like, oh, if I just took that idea and turn it sideways, suddenly, or it spurs on the creativity of someone else in the room or whatever. So creativity can often, I think, a lot of the times we think it's like some genius like moment, and those do come, but you can do a lot to sort of create an environment in which you're thinking about and thinking through ideation, either yourself, but I would encourage people to bounce those ideas off of other people, sit down and just throw ideas up in front and see what happens when you take 2 of those ideas and put them side by side. Just grab 2 at random. What happens? What does that make you think of? And a lot of the creativity, you can cause creativity. I know that, a lot of the time I think when you hear artists, there's some artists that like they had their inspirational moment, but I think that actually a lot of artists that they get to that creativity through practice, regular focus, and creating an environment in which they can be creative. And the same goes for any creativity that you're bringing in on promotion or anything where you're trying to create something new, something that didn't exist before. You just need to create the space for that creativity and the outlet of ideas to really come to be.
Wow, thank you for that. Now sounds like a good time to remind all of our volunteers that we do have a Slack channel for you to bounce ideas off of each other. Get on Slack, start messaging each other. It really is, like you said, Myke, so helpful when you have someone to just, talk you through that process, or if you get stuck, someone else's creativity can jump in and help as well. I did want to ask you, you all have very different experiences. Do you think that radio as a platform is still holding some value, or what's your take on that?
I think it is. And I think something that's interesting about radio is that we've seen a resurgence in, and I know that podcasting is different than radio, but it's kind of the same like audio storytelling kind of idea. I've seen a resurgence in that. I know that I've like slowly as the years go on, I'm seeing more people like near my age like listen to more podcasts, and of course like that is kind of like a gate into radio and all that stuff. And so I think that it's still so valuable, and people will always be driving, so there'll always be something that you need to listen to, and we still like pitch our clients to radio stations all the time. And I think that something that's so special about it is how there could be there's so much variety. Like you can get so many different niches and so many different categories. And that's kind of the beautiful part about it, because everyone can find something that they like from it. So I think that it's super valuable and it's really important. And it just goes back to the whole like connections and making human connections. People connect through conversation or, music or just like topics, news. Like, again, there's just so much variety. So I don't think it's dying out at all. I think that it's definitely, it's a very strong platform. And I think that people are slowly starting to understand that there is so much value in it.
Yeah, especially with community radio, there's so many different shows running on all different topics. So really important point you made there. Thanks for that one. Natasha, what about you? You work a lot with artists. How do you feel about the radio?
I definitely think radio is so important. I mean, even, talking, making pitches to pitch different media, we always kind of use sort of radio charts, is kind of at the top of our top points in terms of like, like you want to have this artist in because they were top 40 on the station or they were this or, whatnot. And also just in terms of like your everyday life, like I get a lot of my news from the radio. Just, whether it's the radio's tweeting on Twitter or, it's actually in the car or whatnot, like that is where I get a lot of my day to day. But specifically as well, I think campus radio and college radio and community radio is so important to my job because you guys really champion the underground kind of music, which, I work with a lot of metal, I work with a lot of punk, and as we know, Canada, in terms of commercial radio, there's not a lot of platform. And even in traditional media, there's not a lot of platform for those types of artists. So for us, keeping those genres alive on community radio is incredibly important because it's one of the biggest platforms and most, biggest champions of those kinds of genres. And, it's always very sad to me to see that kind of keep dying, in general, like on the mainstream, those kinds of genres. So it's incredibly important keeping those alive because that's my world. So yeah, like definitely you guys are doing a great job and thank you for championing the underground.
And yeah, thank you for continuing to push for that type of music because it is so important and so creative in its different forms too. So it's really good to always have a spot to air what doesn't get to air on mainstream stations too. Myke, what about your thoughts? You were the radio legend.
Radio's key. I mean, when I say radio, I mean community radio. Whether mainstream radio is of value in 20 years, probably not. Like algorithms can do a better job than, and they're not localized enough. Like to me, I think it all goes back to the idea of building community. Who's your show for? Like who's it serving? Whatever. The experience of programmers understanding the depth of knowledge that they're attached into those communities, they're localized, they're understanding who the local bands are that need to be on or be talked about, or the show that needs to be put out there, or the issue within the community that needs to be discussed. That doesn't exist in many other places, especially these days. I think community radio has become ever more important too, as like, alternative weeklies have been disappearing I don't know. We don't have them anymore in Calgary. That's just not a thing, right? Some of them have migrated online. But the other thing is that like, there's something pretty special about coming across something great on the radio. It's a medium that is out there and that you can tap into as a listener, rather than having to seek something out specifically and then you get the thing that you came across. And that's why I love community radio, because it's bringing together all these different communities under one umbrella. So you can go from the reggae show to the metal show, and there's no reason that you have to not, they're not two diametrically opposed genres. You can listen to both and enjoy both. And the other thing too is like, maybe you started out as the listener coming for the metal show, and then the reggae show comes on afterwards, and then you start to realize, oh, whoa, I didn't know, but I love this, right? So the exposure that we get to new ideas, new things, new music, all these things. Community radio is just so important. Hearing the voices of people out in the community, them reflecting themselves back through the radio, it's key. It's so key. And often I think that community radio stations are filling a new sort of spot in that they are this hub on which these communities are built. So they're like the trunk of the broccoli, and then you're going off, and then you've got the little, each of those trunks coming off the main trunk is the shows, and then all those little the little balls on the broccoli end, those are all that community wrapped around, right? And it's all sort of feeding back, but that's when you really can build a healthy ecosystem. And so much relies on community radio stations getting that message out there. You think about all of the community partners, the bars, the clubs, the bands, so much relies on these shows. Yes, they may have small audiences, but they are dedicated niche audiences, and the kind of radio that people are making for those communities is really important to people having a home in their cities, a home in their, in the way they live their lives.
I think that's such a good way to talk about it. And I hope for all of the volunteers that are here, I know we have some of our new volunteers. I hope that you can see the value in the work that you do, because we all really appreciate it. Let's talk about, Myke, you just said getting that message out there. A lot of promotion nowadays happens on social media. So I'm kind of curious, is there any way to promote yourself without social media in 2021? Or is this just the way we're going to go?
I guess this is one of those questions that you can kind of debate. Like, everyone probably has quite the different opinion on it. Personally, I think that it's just social media. Like, we saw, to bring TikTok up again, because like literally it took over like the world, like the earth. And it's just what everybody's on. That's just like the bottom line. And I think, again, it goes back to being able to find what you like. Everyone feels like they can have their own experience created through social media. So they're following what they like. They're, being able to see like what people, like the people they follow, like what they like, so they can see that. And like everything's just connected. So that's why it runs so quickly, and it can move so fast. Another example of this is with Squid Game, for example. Like for my generation, I saw that a lot of people were watching it because they saw it on TikTok. Everyone was like making jokes about it, or like trying to just like inside jokes that you wouldn't understand if you don't watch the show, and which led to people wanting to watch it so that they can also be in on the joke because it's a meme and people want to know what's going on. And it just goes back to human nature. Like, we all just want to know everything. We want to like be involved. We want to feel like we're included. And I think that's what social media brings. So when it goes back to advertising, I think it's just like you see even the numbers with cable network, like networking TV versus Netflix, or things that you can do online. And I think that those numbers just show that's just the proof. Like, everything's just online. And I think instead of like trying to push against it, just go with it, use it like to your advantage, and kind of like find where your place is so that you can start there and kind of just like branch out. Kind of like what Myke was saying, it's all about the branching and all about the connections and making sure that you realize that there's space to grow. And instead of like feeling like social media is taking over, it's like, how can you use social media to your advantage to kind of like grow what you want to grow? That's kind of how I look at it, at least. So,
yeah. Well, and we got that perspective from very much a Gen Z PR specialist.
Also, so that's just me. And I totally am open to like hearing what other people say, but yeah.
Natasha, what's your take on that?
So I definitely agree in the sense that, social media is your best bang for your buck in terms of marketing. Whether you're using it organically or you're throwing $20 at something, you are getting, if you target it right, you are going to hit so many people and the correct niches that you need, that, those people that want to be engaged with your content. But also, I think another way to kind of advertise outside of social media would be, to go local, whether that's, putting stickers, asking your local bar, hey, Can I put these posters of my radio show? Can you use these? Local festivals, music festivals, once they come back, whenever that happens, I think could be really cool, especially doing kind of more experiential marketing, whether that's like putting a cool display at a festival or a booth, going to local restaurants, places you love, tattoo artists, your friends who might own businesses, and saying, hey, can we collab on something like something like that, I think could be really cool, and especially staying true to that local vibe with community radio. But yeah, like everything kind of works as a puzzle, whether it's, you're doing kind of more of the local marketing or social media, like everything works together to kind of build that really good marketing campaign. So I think like when you're coming up with these things, you should be utilizing everything, whether it's social media, local stuff, maybe, $20 on your friend's podcast, maybe, something along those lines, I think is really good. Maybe you want to pay a really cool TikTok influencer that doesn't charge too much. I think everything plays its role and is important. But definitely in terms of the best bang for your money is definitely advertising.
Social media is kind of key for low budgets too, because you can, you don't have to reach out to the influencers. You can just post your own things and, like you said, targeting it right. So I'm glad you brought up the money aspect, because I think it's so important for community radio too. Myke, what about you? You've done some pretty creative stuff off of social media. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm maybe of an older generation. I'm that guy who just I use Twitter as a tool. I deleted my Facebook account because I thought it was ruining my life, and I'm that guy. But it's powerful, and this is the thing. I have so much to learn from many people. I am not the expert on social media. Listen to these two. They know what they're talking about. In terms of like non-social media related things, I think it does really come down to that local angle, being in the spaces, in the community. You want to be involved in the community and providing value in the community, for one, because you care about that community. Otherwise, why are you doing a free radio show about whatever niche thing it is that you're doing your community radio show about, right? Like people who come to community radio stations care about something. So be a part of that community, get involved in that community. The relationships that you'll develop are probably the biggest asset that you'll have in terms of promotion in the long run. And a lot of that promotion won't come necessarily because of you're actively seeking out that promotion. It will come because you're providing value, and what you give, you get. And it just is this natural and reciprocal relationship. But it is, I think, especially for community radio shows, it is a part of being part of the ecosystem, right? Whatever that is. If you are promoting a show that's all about all ages punk rock, then you have to be at the all ages, or part of that all ages punk rock scene. You have to be providing value, whether that's it's your body there, whether it's you telling other people about those shows or whatever. I think there is something that can be done on a localized level. It's getting more difficult because the places to sort of get that message out are going away in sort of the physical manner, but they're still there. Campus papers are still there, right? They're super hyper localized. They're hungry for cool content, and the folks writing those things are like into weird things like you are. So they sometimes will write up something that a major publication would never touch, right? But the way to sort of find those things, often we're not exposed to them until we really deeply ingrain ourselves into those communities, because then you start to realize, oh, I need to go put up a poster for my show at this hot dog shop in town, because that's where all the all age punk rock shows or kids hang out or whatever, right? Like you really need to have that deep understanding of, it goes back to that idea of understanding the user, understanding the listener that you're trying to tap into. Where do they hang out? What do they read? Are they part of some Reddit community that you need to be a part of too? Or so it's a bit about putting yourself out there. And then the other thing, I think nothing beats personal connections, right? Like Twitter, all social media is good, but there is an it's the impersonableness of it doesn't necessarily always get people to take the jump. And I will say that it is quite a jump to go from a non-listener to a listener of a radio show, right? That is a significant cost that you're asking people. I mean, not money cost, but their time. They could be doing literally a million other things that social media is feeding them. So you need to get it to them. And I think like that personal connection or that network effect of local campaigns and relationships being built out can really get people to get over that barrier that's in the way of taking the leap and listening for the first time.
Thank you all so much for your takes on all of that. Because we have folks from different fields, we thought it would be cool to ask some more niche questions to you individually, or more to the PR folks and then to our radio friend, Myke. So we'll start off with one for Natasha and Anastasia and let Myke take a breath for a minute. Do you have a checklist that clients should follow when you're considering working with them?
Do you mean like when it comes to the client themselves, or like what they should do when it comes to like promoting themselves?
Oh, like some things that you kind of go to tell them to promote themselves. Exactly.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I think the number one thing I always go to is just like be authentic, because I think that people can tell if you're like not being, authentic. And I think that in this day and age, we've had so much, there's so much exposure to like different types of people and like different types of niches, and like what people are like and what people see gets the views or like gets the, the attention. So I think that unfortunately, some people, instead of like trying to be themselves, they sometimes just mold themselves into what they think people want them to be. But at the end of the day, I think that the real true success stories come from just being yourself and just trusting your gut and doing what you genuinely like and love, because then you're going to attract those people as well. So when it comes to radio, for example, too, like it's important to just, be your true self and express whatever, like it's such an important point to just remember that these are places where people want to have true connection with people and just have like a true like, oh wow, like I completely agree with that person, like wow, that really resonated with me. And I think that just comes from just honestly being who you are. So instead of like putting on a mask or some sort of like what people want you to be, just to be yourself, and then the rest will kind of just come in its place and work how it's got to work. So I think that's like the number one thing for me when it comes to checklists.
Very cool. Natasha, anything that you always try to push for your clients to do?
So along the same lines of that, a big thing for me is back to the whole building of a community. I think it's really important to be, like what Anastasia said, is be who you are. And let that come through, because people, when they see whether it's a celebrity or a personality, they might go, yeah, they're okay, I'll like them on whatever. But what's going to turn them into somebody who's a dedicated fan, a dedicated listener, is that personal connection, right? To the artist, to the music, to what the artist represents. And a big part of that too is kind of going a little out of your way to make people feel special, make your fans feel special, make your listeners feel special, whether that's, changing some messaging on your social media platforms, to be like, we as the community, me and you, like it's us against the world type of thing. reaching out, some artists I've seen, which does really well is, at shows, they take that time after the shows to meet every single person and have a conversation with every single person. And as they get bigger, it's tougher to do that. But when you're starting out, it's really important because still the best form of marketing is your word of mouth, right? So it's really important when you really connect with people on that level and going a little bit of your way. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, this person, this artist did this. I had a chat with this radio personality. You have to go see them. You've got to go check them out. You've got to go listen to their show. I think that that's really, really important. And it goes back to knowing who you are and knowing, again, the audience you want to reach out to and taking those extra steps to make them feel really special and that they are a part of what you are doing, because that will motivate them to, for example, buy your merch down the line, or, if you have it, or maybe you're doing as a radio host, maybe you've got tickets to something, they'll be like, yeah, I definitely want to go because I feel a part of this. And I think that that's really important, that the community fan building, the connection to people at the level, is really the best thing you can do to get started.
Thank you both for that. Myke, our question for you actually goes off of that. So during your time in radio, what are some really valuable ways you've seen programmers connect with their audiences, and what can you share about the ways that they've built their own communities?
So first, I'll just make a great radio show. That's the key. That's the key, is making a great radio show. And that's not going to get you all the way there. That's the other thing. I know many radio shows where they make a great radio show, but then they didn't do any of the promotion or these kinds of things behind, the legwork that has to come after the fact. It's like seeing an artist who's like so stunningly good, and yet they can't views or whatever, or they just have no desire. And it's like the two have to go hand in hand, right? Making the great product, but then also like promoting it and making sure that you get the word out. In terms of like successful things that I've seen a lot of shows do outside of what I was talking about with like embedding themselves in the community, I think that's probably the key in most of these. Cross show promotions. So trying to find the other radio shows on the station. In Toronto, you've got multiple community radio stations. So are there even potentially other folks on other stations playing similar genres? Like, what are all the jazz shows across all the community radio stations in the GTA area? That'd be an interesting list. And if I was a jazz fan, it wouldn't matter to me what the home is. I would just be wanting to hear the latest and greatest. And so is there ways that you can each be building off of your networks? I think the thing I like about the cross show is that you're getting that sort of Venn diagram. Yes, there will be some people that are listening one and the other. But you'd be surprised at how many people are tuning in for a specific radio program because they found it and they know that it's there and they've built it into their routine of how they live their lives. But they don't necessarily know about the other show that they should be listening to on the station. So find like minds, find ways to, I think, like leverage people who are already listening to the radio station. Because that's the other thing, is that I think, people are still driving and they still got radios in their cars, but it's become just so easy. People get in their cars, the Bluetooth connects, they can continue listening to whatever it was that was on their phone. So that conversion of not listening to the radio to listening to the radio is quite an expensive one. Someone who's listening to the radio already, getting them to listen to more of it is a much cheaper conversion. Right. So just trying to find other shows that are connected. And it doesn't always even have to be, I think, like genre, right? Like there will be crossover between communities, or can you do a special show? Maybe there's a spoken word program about LGBT issues on the station, and the metal show is going to do an LGBT special, right? Like, let's bring those two worlds together, promote one and the other, and you can do a lot to sort of transfer audiences back and forth between the two. So yeah, I think finding those connections, building that, and the other thing is, like, don't forget that you yourself are something that is promoting other people, right? So when you have a guest on and an interview, you're tapping into the audience that person or that band or whatever brings along with it. So when your show is that node for the community, where it is, when it becomes the place where the band comes into play because that's what you do. If you're a jazz band in Toronto, you come in and you play on this show because that's what you do. If you're a jazz band, like, when you're at that level, when you are the hub of that community, every time that those interviews, guests, whatever comes in, they will be bringing it to your show, probably through social media, right? They're tapping into their worlds and whatever and bringing it your way. But use that, like, leverage those connections, and understand that you're generating great content for your audience, but you're also sort of have an opportunity whenever you're doing any sort of interview, even every single time you play an artist on your show, it's an opportunity, I think, to tap in a wider scale. I'll give the example of a friend of mine who's still doing a show on CJSW, and he posts his entire playlists on Twitter and tags every single artist that he plays on the show. And the amount that they either spread that message out, or even if it just becomes where then he gets an interview down the road, right? Like, maybe he didn't get the network effect of social media in that moment, but it's building bridges, it's building connections, and all those things sort of can add up. And sort of come back into the show. So I think cross show and tap into the audiences that your guests and your whatever come with.
What do you guys effective form of social media in order to get in contact with artists and find new musicians? And
I think that, honestly, like, something that I've noticed, like, in the past while, is that a lot of my pitching has been through, like, DMs on Instagram or, like, Twitter. I think that with emails, like, there's so many people get a lot of emails in one day. And, like, I'm not saying that emails don't work. Definitely, like, they're always my go-to still. I actually still use emails like my number one. But I think that with phones, like, when you're on Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff, those notifications, like, they keep going. And, like, I think it's quicker to answer. So sometimes I'll just get a response back like, oh, here's my email. And then that way in the email, it can be like, oh, hey, like, do you remember me? Thanks for messaging me on the DM. And then that way there's that connection already. So I think that's, like, a good one. And I think also when it comes to, again, going in the community, like, I think that putting yourself in, like, if you have a favorite artist or something like that, like, just going to shows if you're able to. Of course, I know things are different now because of COVID, but just getting into the community and trying to make connections through, like, oh, like, this person is a fan of this person, who do they know? And maybe that person knows someone who knows the next person. And I think it's just always just trying to make connections and just having conversations, because then that way it's not just like you just found an email on Google and, like, you just, like, went for it, which can work too sometimes too. Like, don't, again, like, just try everything. That's what I say, because, like, I think if you just throw it all out there, and then hopefully something will come back to you. So, but I think that Instagram and Twitter has been working pretty well for me recently.
All right, cool. Thank you. Natasha, you, in terms of finding new artists, finding new music to spotlight, what are your go-tos?
So for me, my biggest go-to has always been sort of the media within my niche. So, following and keeping tabs on sort of what this magazine does, because I know they cover the music I like. Following bands that I like, and then they have other bands playing under them. Like the smaller bands, I'll check them out. I usually end up falling in love with them. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's sort of ways that I find music, is through the different media, through podcasts, through radio, through going to see shows. But I think like for radio hosts and radio programmers, I think a really cool way to find new artists is to get on the PR lists. And, publicists always are excited to hear from you. It doesn't matter your size. Because in general, like we have a lot of big clients, big artists, but we also have some smaller artists too that we're, bringing up, or we're trying to help emerge, or, something along those lines. So we always have the big, we have the small, we have the middle. So it's always good to kind of get on those, all different genres. If you like all different genres, just whatever sort of PR teams of that work with music or artists or anything along those lines, because you'll definitely get the news, and I mean you'll be the first to hear about it if you're on this list. So yeah, definitely that's a way to also find artists.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've gotten on a few PR lists too, and can definitely say it's useful, and you can never run out of interviews because you'll always be sent them. Myke, you come from a very interesting background with Christoph's question, and thank you for asking it, because radio stations, as you know, Christoph, from the training that we did, we have really specific requirements that we need to meet for what gets played and how often and when. So what do you think about ways to find new music and new artists?
The music director can be a really great way to sort of be tapped in. So like getting this, I think the staff to sort of understand, like you need to define your show. Like, don't get me wrong. I did the like good music on the radio show, but like the more defined you can be, the more your audience can sort of like have an expectation of what they're going to hear, the more that people can sort of make a call in advance of whether they would fit in terms of your program. I don't know. I've been doing it for so long that like I started, MySpace was a really great way behind bands and whatever, because people would like have the friend connections and whatever, like their favorite bands on MySpace. Personally, when I was doing my last show, SoundCloud, but I think that that's going to be quite genre specific, right? But SoundCloud was for the show I was doing at the time was there was a lot of electronics. That was a really big way. I think it is going to be probably specific to genre more than anything. The requirements that you have in terms of the show, I think you do need to put more effort and time in digging in on Canadian artists and local artists specifically, right? To be making sure that you're putting in the legwork that's required there. So you're hitting your CanCon, so that, I don't know if you have a local requirement at CJRU, but we did at CJSW 1 artist minimum per hour. So I think like it is important to put in that legwork, not only because you need to hit those requirements, but because that is where it is harder. I think like the artists on an international scene, even if they're, even if you're talking about some, I only play this really narrow band within whatever. Once you get to an international level, the ways of that message getting out are usually pretty specific to the genre. There's always the magazines or the publication online or whatever, but it becomes much more difficult to be doing that at a local level or a Canadian level. And so that's where I think if you can flip that around and you become the hub, you become the place that people are sending it to, because you're that critical in terms, it does a lot of the work for you. And I'm a big fan of letting it do the work for you. I've been a music director. Don't spend more than 15 seconds listening to a song. There's so much music out there. There's so much happening. Like if it doesn't grab you quickly, there's something else. There's something, like, move on, right? And that's not to say that I didn't miss out on something because of that style of listening, but every show that I've done, at least for the last 15 years, has been very new music focused. Like I almost everything I was playing had probably been released within the last 2 months on pretty much every one of those shows. So it was a lot of listening to new music. And you can only do that in the quantities that you need by listening in very short installments until something actually catches your ear, and then you decide whether to delve deeper. So I think the thing is actually to go through volume. And that's where a platform like SoundCloud, where you could just go play. And then the other nice thing about doing it digitally instead of when I was doing it as a music director and having the CD and the tray is you can just click to the middle of the song and be like, oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, there's the hook, right? And that's a good hook. Whereas, with the CD player, you've got to sort of be scanning or dropping the needle through the record or whatever. So use that to your advantage. Yeah, find those communities that exist out there, but don't feel like you need to give everything a hard shake, or find the one track on a mediocre album or whatever, that you're going to play out for the things that grab you quickly. Because the other thing is that you're playing in a medium where it has to grab people quickly, right? Like if it doesn't land with you until the fourth listen, unless you're doing some kind of radio show where people are there for that deep listen or that critical take or whatever, you need that same sort of, like, it captures you on the first listen to kind of land.
How difficult is it to promote on TikTok? So maybe we'll start with Anastasia on that one, since you love TikTok.
So TikTok is one of those things that I think the reason why it went so big is because like anyone can go viral on it. Like there can be an account that was just created and then one post and it gets millions of views. I still don't understand why or how that happens. It might just be the algorithm and how it pushes out its content. So really, it's just a matter of like just posting what you want to post, and just keep making content, and then hopefully something will land, and hopefully you'll be viral one day. Who knows? But I think that again, it just goes back to being true to yourself, posting what makes you happy, what makes you excited. Whether what music you like, or if you're a radio personality, like you can post anything on it too, and that's the beauty of it. There's always going to be somebody that likes it. So I think it's definitely easier to get go viral on it than maybe other platforms. So it's definitely a good place to start, I'd say.
Right. Natasha, you're also a fan of TikTok, it sounds like, from your work, and you've been in that influencer community a little bit. What's your take?
Well, TikTok is an interesting platform. I mean, it's one of those, in order to go viral, it's basically like a stroke of luck, right? In terms of virality, but you never know exactly what's going to go viral and what's not. And I don't think anybody can specifically tell you this video is going to go viral. It's always kind of a, surprise for everybody. But in terms of having sort of a steady growth, steady followership, steady views, it's really important to find something that is true to you and something that you really want to start doing on TikTok, something you really love, something you enjoy, and find those audiences that enjoy that by, using hashtags, following, certain people, collabing with those people in those communities like we've been talking about. And start pumping up those videos, and try different things too, because some one form of video might not work that well, but if you tweak it a little bit, it might work better. Sometimes it's a little difficult as well because there's a lot of trends and things going on, but the problem with really tapping into those giant trends is that there's so many people doing it that the algorithm only has like a couple seconds to put you up there. So I think something good to do is to find those kind of medium ones, the ones, if you search hashtags on the platform, you'll see how many views, how many people are posting that hashtag. Go for the middle ground. Go for like the 500K hashtag instead of the 23 billion, right? Because you're going to be there longer if you're looking into doing trends. But yeah, like find something that speaks to you, as well as using the popular music. The popular music's a big thing. That can be a difference between, 100,000 views versus, 200, is using that big song, which I know sounds funny to use. Like, if you're someone who doesn't really listen to Justin Bieber, like why would you use Justin Bieber on TikTok? But I think there's a lot of different ways you can use those songs, whether it's, something that's comedy, maybe you're doing something serious, but you can make it work. So that's really important, is to use that music. Also, a good tip is to actually mute the added sound, or have it there. So then that way that pushes you. But yeah, those are just some little tips and tricks. I mean, usually for me, I just do a lot of research on, going through TikTok. Okay, what looks like it's working? I go to YouTube. What are the TikTok trends this week? Those kinds of things. And you find a lot of stuff that can help. But again, like I think what Anastasia said as well, is staying true to you and doing what you are passionate about and what kind of videos you want to make. And sort of, finding those little differences and how to do them a little bit better, and how to get more views, but still staying true to that is really important.